1993. A game changes the world. You know it. Doom made id Software legends. Millions of copies sold. Rockstar status. Unstoppable. But what do you do when you've already invented the future?
The original ideas behind Quake were starting to develop at the end of 1994. We didn't have a cohesive vision of the game or how it would play.
They wanted to make a fantasy RPG, then an action thriller, then something that didn't even have a name yet. For 2 years, nobody at id Software knew what Quake was supposed to be. What came out wasn't a game. It was a bomb. Quake invented the online shooter. Quake invented esports. Quake invented the modding community. And it destroyed the studio that built it. Before we talk about Quake, we need to talk about two kids who had absolutely no business changing the world. John Carmack. Quiet, obsessive, a programmer so gifted he could make a PC do things the hardware wasn't designed to do. John Romero. Loud, charismatic, a designer who understood maybe better than anyone alive what made games feel good. Together, they were id Software, and in 1993, they did the impossible. Doom didn't just sell well, it rewrote the rules. It was installed on more computers than Windows 95. Companies and universities across the country had to ban it outright because Doom's data traffic was choking their networks. A year later, the US Marine Corps did the opposite. They built their own official training version called Marine Doom. So, what do you do after that? With Doom 2 barely out the door, id Software was supposed to be celebrating. Instead, something was already breaking. The problem wasn't talent, it wasn't money. The problem was, nobody could agree on what came next. Early ideas for Quake read like fever dreams. A dark fantasy RPG, a game with a hammer as the main weapon. A story about a character simply called Quake, a soldier so powerful the ground shook when he walked. A fully simulated medieval world. None of it stuck, because the engine didn't exist yet. Here's something most people don't realize about id Software. John Carmack didn't build games, he built engines. The game was almost secondary. For Doom, that worked perfectly. Romero's design vision and Carmack's engine grew up together. For Quake, Carmack was attempting something nobody had ever done. True 3D. Not the clever illusion of Doom. Real three-dimensional space, real lighting, real physics. And that took time. A lot of time. While Carmack worked on the engine in near total isolation, the rest of the team sat waiting. Designers without a design tool, artists without a canvas. Months passed, ideas piled up and died. The fantasy RPG concept? Gone. The hammer? Gone. A coherent vision for what Quake actually was? Still missing. And then, in January 1996, while id was still figuring out its own game, a competitor released something that made the whole industry hold its breath. Duke Nukem 3D. Revolutionary graphics. Attitude. A game that felt like the future. The gaming press went wild. Carmack wasn't impressed. He looked at the build engine, the technology under Duke Nukem 3D, and had one verdict. Held together with bubble gum. He knew his engine was different. He just needed more time to prove it. But time was the one thing id Software was running out of. The team was restless. Publishers were waiting. And two men who had built an empire together were slowly, quietly starting to want different things. Quake had been in development for 2 years. It still didn't have a release date or a finished design. or a name that meant anything yet. This is the story of how they finished it anyway, and what it cost them. Imagine you're trying to build a house, but before you can build the house, you have to invent concrete and steel and the concept of a foundation. That was John Carmack in 1994. The Quake engine wasn't an upgrade of Doom. It was a complete rebuild from scratch. True polygon-based 3D rendering, dynamic lighting, real shadows, a physics system that actually simulated weight. Every single piece had to be invented. And while Carmack invented it, everyone else waited. The IT offices in Mesquite, Texas, the Black Cube, a 7-story black glass office tower on LBJ Freeway. Pizza boxes, Mountain Dew, monitors running 24 hours. John Romero had a problem. He was one of the greatest game designers alive, and he had nothing to design. Without a working engine, there were no tools. Without tools, there were no levels. Without levels, there was no game. So Romero did what Romero always did. He played games. Doom, Heretic, Hexen, anything to stay sharp, anything to feel productive. The other team members noticed. Carmack noticed. Tension between the two co-founders was building, tension that would, less than 2 years later, end the partnership for good. But in the middle of all this tension, something unexpected happened. id Software and Nine Inch Nails found each other. Trent Reznor, the man behind Nine Inch Nails, one of the most influential musicians of the decade. Fresh off the Downward Spiral, an album that had just gone double platinum, he was a Doom fan, a massive one. And id was just as obsessed with his music. Both sides wanted in. Think about what that meant in 1995. The biggest rock star in industrial music and a game studio in a black glass office tower in Texas, deciding to build something together. Neither side needed convincing. Reznor didn't just write background music. He built a sonic world. The Quake soundtrack wasn't meant to pump you up. It was meant to unsettle you. Drones, industrial noise, silence used as a weapon. He flew out to id's offices. He played Quake. He went back to his studio and disappeared for months. What he delivered was unlike anything in gaming before. Not a score, an atmosphere. Its textures and ambiances and whirling machine noises and stuff. We tried to make the most sinister, depressive, scary, frightening kind of thing. He did it without a fee, out of mutual admiration between id and the band. The engine was finally taking shape. Carmack had done it. True 3D, real lighting, everything he promised. But now a new problem emerged. Nobody could agree what to put inside it. The original Quake concept, the fantasy RPG, had been quietly abandoned. What replaced it was a patchwork. Some levels felt like Doom with better graphics. Some felt like a medieval dungeon crawler. Some felt like pure abstract nightmare. There was no coherent world, no unified vision. By the team's own later admission, Quake ended up closer to a straightforward shooter than anyone had originally set out to make. That wasn't a compliment. That was a resignation. By early 1996, GT Interactive was waiting. The press was waiting. The entire gaming world was waiting. id Software set a release date, June 1996. They had roughly 6 months. The game had no finished campaign, no multiplayer system, no final level design. And the two men who built this company were barely speaking. Carmack wanted discipline, structure, focus, ship the product. Romero wanted creative freedom. He believed great games couldn't be rushed, that the best ideas came when you weren't watching the clock. Both of them were right. That was the problem. And then, in the spring of 1996, something happened that nobody saw coming. The game started to come together. The engine was running. The levels were loading. The monsters were moving. For the first time, the team sat down and played Quake. All of it, together. And they knew. "63 days. To finish a game that had been in development for 2 years, with no finished campaign, incomplete multiplayer, and a team running on caffeine and stubbornness. This is what the industry calls crunch. In 1996, they just called it Tuesday. The id team essentially moved into the office. 18-hour days became normal. Weekends disappeared. Carmack coded. And Sandy Peterson, one of id's most experienced designers, built levels at a pace that bordered on inhuman. Under brutal crunch conditions, he designed almost the entirety of Episode 4, 7 maps built faster than anyone thought possible. It wasn't half the game, but it was a significant part of what shipped. Romero designed too, but the atmosphere had changed. The conversations were shorter, the silences longer. Somewhere in the chaos of those final weeks, it made a decision that would accidentally invent a new industry. They built a proper internet multiplayer system, not the peer-to-peer patchwork of Doom, a real client-server architecture. You could host a server. Anyone in the world could connect. The foundation was there. But there was a problem. Over a 28.8K modem, the standard in 1996, the experience was nearly unplayable. Every movement had to wait for the server to respond. The latency was brutal. The packet loss worse. Carmack knew it. And 6 months after Quake shipped, he quietly released a free update called Quake World. Quake World introduced client-side prediction. The client no longer waited for the server. It calculated your own movement locally, in real time. Suddenly, over that same 28.8K modem, Quake felt fast, fluid, alive. That was the moment online gaming truly began. Not June, December. Carmack shipped the future twice.
Quake World, it's basically my research project into extending the network play aspects of Quake. The first stage of it that we're in beta testing right now, that we're about ready to release, is a new network protocol that provides more latency tolerance for the client, so there's less lag, and the network play is more robust in handling of problems along the connection. At that stage, it's just Quake with better network play. It has a few nicer features where the status is changed. It has persistent user accounts where your ranks are tracked through everything, but the gameplay is exactly what it is right now. The next phase that we're changing is specific rules for clan play, for more persistent ranking of entire team scores, special rules for team games, more customization for the servers, and probably also at that stage we're going to be adding ghost clients, spectators, full server demo records for sportscast playbacks, and the next stage after that, the final experimental stage, will be adding persistent servers, where instead of the servers changing levels, you hop between the servers on there.
Within weeks of release, clans started forming. Organized teams, practice schedules, rivalries, tournaments followed, then prize money. Nobody at it had planned any of this. They just built the pipes. The world filled them. It was late at night. The office was quiet. Most of the team had gone home. John Romero sat alone at his computer and uploaded Quake to the internet. No launch event, no press conference, no champagne. Just a man, a modem, and a file. In less than an hour, 3,000 people had downloaded it. By morning, it was tens of thousands. By the end of the week, Quake was everywhere. The reviews were historic. The sales were historic. The cultural impact was immediate. id Software had done it again. But Romero, sitting alone that night, uploading the game he had poured 2 years into, didn't feel like celebrating. He felt the distance between what Quake was supposed to be and what it became. Between the team that started this journey and the team that finished it. 2 weeks after Quake shipped, John Romero was gone. Not 3 months, not a season. 2 weeks. The speed of it says everything. The official statement was mutual. Those who were there say it wasn't. Carmack had lost faith. The team had lost patience. And Romero, one of the 2 men who built this entire world, walked out of the id Software offices for the last time. Weeks later, Carmack addressed the split publicly in a statement that left no room for interpretation. Romero was pushed out of id because he wasn't working hard enough. Romero went on to found Ion Storm. He promised the world Daikatana, a game that would make Quake look primitive. That story did not go well. Carmack stayed at id, built Quake 2, Quake 3, Doom 3, and then quietly left to work on virtual reality. The 2 Johns never worked together again, but the world Quake built, it never stopped growing. Half-Life, Counter-Strike, Team Fortress. Every online shooter you've ever played traces a direct line back to a black glass office tower in Texas, and 2 men who couldn't agree on anything, except that games could be something more. The clans became esports organizations. The mods became studios. The players became developers. Quake didn't just ship a game, it shipped an entire future. Somewhere tonight, someone is still playing Quake. Not for nostalgia, not for history, just because nothing else feels quite like it.